The massive space station known as Unity Prime stretched across the void like a steel and crystal flower, its countless docking bays receiving ships from hundreds of different worlds. Ambassador Marcus Kane stood at the viewport of his modest transport vessel, watching the station grow larger as they approached. His weathered hands remained steady, despite the importance of this moment. After 3 years of negotiations, humanity was finally being considered for membership in the Galactic Council. Kane appeared unremarkable to most alien observers. Average height for a human, graying hair and quiet brown eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. His diplomatic credentials were impressive but not extraordinary. What the galaxy didn't know was that before becoming Earth's most skilled negotiator, Marcus Kane had been something else entirely. Something that made hardened soldiers wake up screaming in the night. Something that had earned him a nickname whispered in the darkest corners of human space: Baba Yaga. The docking procedure completed smoothly, and Kane gathered his simple briefcase containing Earth's formal application documents. No weapons, no security detail, no intimidating technology. The Galactic Council had insisted on these conditions, viewing humanity as a primitive species that needed to prove its peaceful intentions. Kane had agreed without hesitation, much to the surprise of Earth's military leadership. As he stepped off his ship, Kane was greeted by a delegation of 3 council representatives. The Zolonian ambassador, Vextar, towered over him with 4 arms and crystalline skin that reflected the station's lights. Beside him stood Councillor Hyreth of the Aquilian Federation, her feathered head tilted in what Kane recognized as barely concealed disdain. The third delegate was Overseer Korath, a heavily armored being from the militant Drakmor Empire whose red eyes glowed with aggressive interest. "Welcome, human," Vextar spoke through his translation device, his voice carrying the hollow tone of forced politeness. "We trust your journey was adequate." Kane smiled warmly, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. None of the aliens reciprocated. "Thank you for this opportunity. Earth is eager to contribute to the galactic community." Hyreth's feathers ruffled slightly. "Contribute? Your species has barely mastered interstellar travel. What could you possibly offer beings who have conquered galaxies?" The comment was clearly intended to provoke, but Kane's expression remained pleasant. "Perhaps our perspective as newcomers might offer fresh insights. Sometimes those closest to a problem are the last to see the solution." Korath's mechanical breathing apparatus hissed with what might have been amusement. "Perspective? You humans wage war on your own kind over resources while we command fleets that span star systems. Your perspective is that of insects discussing philosophy." Kane nodded thoughtfully, as if considering the criticism seriously. "You raise valid points. I hope our discussions over the next few days will address your concerns." The delegation led Kane through the station's gleaming corridors, past viewing galleries where beings from dozens of species observed the proceedings. Kane noticed the subtle signs of tension in their movements, the way conversations stopped when they passed, the predatory interest in their eyes. This wasn't just a membership interview. This was entertainment. The council had arranged quarters for Kane in what they called the primitive species wing of the station, a section designed for races that hadn't yet achieved what the council considered true technological advancement. His room was spartanly furnished but clean, with a small workstation and a narrow viewport showing the stars beyond. As Kane unpacked his few belongings, he activated a small device hidden in his briefcase. The scanner confirmed what he'd suspected since boarding the station. His quarters were under constant surveillance. His communications were being monitored, and there were energy signatures suggesting weapon systems aimed at his location, standard procedure for species the council didn't trust. A soft chime announced an incoming message on his quarters communication system. Kane accepted the call, and Vextar's crystalline face appeared on the small screen. "Ambassador Kane, the council has decided to begin your evaluation immediately. Please report to Chamber 7 within the hour. Bring all documentation regarding your species' military capabilities, technological achievements, and resource projections." Kane raised an eyebrow. "I was told we would have time to settle in before formal proceedings began. Plans change, human. The council's time is valuable, and frankly, we see little point in extending these discussions unnecessarily." 1 hour. The transmission ended abruptly. Kane sat back in his chair, recognizing the tactic immediately. They were trying to put him off balance, force him to react defensively, make mistakes that would justify rejecting humanity's application. It was a crude psychological manipulation that might work on a typical diplomat, but Marcus Kane wasn't a typical diplomat. He opened his briefcase and removed a small, worn photograph. It showed a younger version of himself standing with a team of soldiers, their faces grim but determined. That had been a lifetime ago, before peace talks and formal negotiations, when problems were solved with more direct methods. The man in that photograph had been feared across 3 solar systems, a ghost who appeared when conventional solutions failed. Kane tucked the photograph away and straightened his simple civilian suit. The Galactic Council wanted to play games with humanity's representative. They had no idea what they were dealing with. In their arrogance, they saw only a middle-aged human diplomat from a primitive world. They were about to learn that some humans were much more dangerous when underestimated. As Kane walked toward Chamber 7, his footsteps echoing in the empty corridor, he allowed himself a small smile. The aliens thought they were in control of the situation. They believed their superior technology and numbers gave them all the advantages they needed. What they didn't understand was that Marcus Kane had spent decades learning to turn apparent weakness into devastating strength. The Galactic Council was about to receive an education in human nature. And like all of Kane's lessons, it would be one they'd never forget. Chamber 7's doors slid open as Kane approached, revealing a large semicircular room where dozens of alien representatives sat in judgment. At the center was a single chair, clearly intended for him. As he walked toward it, Kane noticed the subtle positioning of guards, the locations of exits, the energy readings from concealed weapons. Old habits died hard, especially for someone who had once been humanity's most effective killer. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. Towering alien forms looked down from elevated seats arranged in a perfect semicircle, their various eyes, sensors, and optical organs focused on the lone human sitting in the center. The lighting was harsh and directed downward, creating shadows that made Kane appear small and vulnerable. Every detail had been calculated to make the subject feel powerless. Kane settled into the chair with the same calm demeanor he'd maintained since arriving. His briefcase rested beside him and his hands lay folded in his lap. To the assembled delegates, he looked like exactly what they expected. A nervous primitive trying to appear confident while hopelessly outmatched. High Counselor Thaindros, an ancient being whose species had helped found the Galactic Council 3,000 years ago, spoke first. His voice resonated through the chamber's speakers, carrying the weight of eons. Human designation Marcus Kane. You appear before this council seeking membership for your species. We have reviewed your preliminary submissions and find them concerning. Kane inclined his head respectfully. I welcome the opportunity to address any concerns you might have, High Counselor. Overseer Korath leaned forward in his seat, his red mechanical eyes glowing brighter. Your species' history is one of constant warfare. Your own planet's surface bears the scars of nuclear weapons. Why should civilized beings trust humans with access to galactic technology? Our history does include conflicts, Kane admitted, but it also shows our capacity for growth, learning, and eventual cooperation. We've moved beyond those early mistakes. Counselor Hyrith's feathers bristled with obvious disdain. Moved beyond them? Your application mentions ongoing territorial disputes, resource conflicts, and what you call police actions across multiple colonies. This is your idea of peaceful evolution? Kane's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes that none of the aliens caught. Every species faces challenges as they expand into space. We handle ours as responsibly as possible. Vextar's crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights as he spoke. Responsibly? Our intelligence services have intercepted communications referring to something called black operations, and mentions of individuals designated as assets rather than soldiers. These sound like the tools of a militaristic species that values deception over diplomacy. The chamber fell silent, waiting for Kane's response. Several council members exchanged glances, clearly expecting him to become defensive or attempt to deny the accusations. Instead, Kane simply nodded. You're very thorough in your research. Yes. Humanity has intelligence services and specialized personnel for situations where conventional diplomacy isn't sufficient. Most spacefaring civilizations do. High Counselor Thaindros manipulated a control interface, and holographic displays appeared around the chamber, showing various human military installations and spacecraft. These images suggest your species maintains a significant military infrastructure, despite claiming peaceful intentions. Explain. Kane studied the displays with professional interest, noting which installations the Council had discovered and which remained hidden. Their intelligence was good but not complete. We've learned that peace is best maintained from a position of strength. These forces exist primarily for defense and maintaining order in our expanding territories. Overseer Korath's breathing apparatus hissed loudly. Defense? Your ships mount weapons capable of cracking planetary crusts. Your defensive installations could eliminate entire star systems. This is the arsenal of conquerors, not protectors. Effective defense sometimes requires overwhelming capability, Kane replied calmly. The goal is to make conflict so costly that potential aggressors seek diplomatic solutions instead. The questioning continued for hours, with different council members taking turns trying to corner Kane or catch him in contradictions. They asked about human expansion policies, military doctrine, resource extraction methods, and treatment of non-human life forms. Each question was designed to paint humanity as aggressive, deceptive, or unworthy of council membership. Kane answered each query with patience and apparent honesty, occasionally conceding points while subtly redirecting conversations toward humanity's achievements in science, medicine, and peaceful cooperation. He never lost his temper, never became defensive, and never appeared rattled by even the most aggressive questioning. What the Council didn't realize was that Kane was conducting his own assessment. He noted which members seemed genuinely concerned about galactic stability, and which were simply enjoying the opportunity to humiliate a representative from a younger species. He observed their body language, their reaction patterns, their personal biases and prejudices. Most importantly, he was identifying the power structures within the Council itself. Who really made decisions, who followed orders, and who might be influenced if the situation required more direct intervention. As the formal session neared its end, Councillor Hirath made what was clearly intended as a final devastating point. Ambassador Kane, our records show that humans have a curious habit of giving nicknames to particularly effective military personnel. Terms like Ghost, Reaper, and something called Baba Yaga. These sound like titles for killers, not peacekeepers. For the first time since entering the chamber, Kane's calm demeanor flickered slightly. It was barely perceptible. Just a momentary tightening around his eyes, but several council members noticed it. Military traditions vary among species, Kane said carefully. Humans sometimes use colorful language to describe professional competence. High Counselor Thaindro sensed weakness and pressed the advantage. Professional competence in what exactly? Our xenopsychologists suggest these terms indicate your species has an unhealthy fascination with death and violence. Perhaps membership in our peaceful alliance is premature. Kane was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving slowly around the chamber as if seeing each council member clearly for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a subtle change in tone that none of the aliens quite understood. High Counselor, the universe can be a dangerous place. Sometimes peaceful species require protection from those who would exploit their commitment to diplomacy. Humanity has always been willing to shoulder that burden. Protection. Korath's laugh was a harsh mechanical sound. From what? Your species has encountered no significant threats in your brief expansion period. Kane smiled then, and something in that expression made several council members unconsciously shift in their seats. Perhaps we've been more effective at handling threats than you realize. The formal session ended with High Counselor Thaindros announcing that the council would deliberate overnight before rendering their decision. Kane was escorted back to his quarters by the same three-member delegation that had greeted him, though their attitude had grown noticeably more contemptuous. As they walked through the station's corridors, Overseer Korath couldn't resist one final jab. I hope you enjoyed your time here, human. It will likely be your species' last interaction with civilized beings for several centuries. Kane's response was mild and polite. Thank you for the consideration you've shown. Whatever decision the council reaches, I'm sure it will be memorable. Back in his quarters, Kane activated his hidden scanner again. The surveillance had intensified, and there were new energy signatures suggesting additional weapon systems had been brought online. The council wasn't just planning to reject humanity's application. They were preparing for something more dramatic. Kane opened his briefcase and looked at the photograph again. The young soldier, staring back at him, had believed that some problems could only be solved with violence. The diplomat he'd become preferred more subtle approaches, but sometimes the old ways were the most effective. Kane spent the night in meditation, a practice he'd learned during his years as a covert operative. While his body rested, his mind processed everything he'd observed during the council session. The patterns were becoming clear, and they painted a disturbing picture of what humanity was really facing. The next morning brought a message summoning him to a different chamber, smaller and more intimate than the previous day's venue. When Kane arrived, he found only 5 council members present. The 3 who had greeted him originally, plus High Counselor Thaindros and another being he hadn't met before. The new alien was introduced as Supreme Military Advisor Krexath, a reptilian creature whose scales seemed to shift color with his emotions. His presence suggested this meeting wasn't just about membership decisions. Ambassador Kane, High Counselor Thaindros began, his ancient voice carrying a different tone than before. The Council has reached a preliminary decision regarding humanity's application. However, certain matters have come to light that require clarification. Kane settled into the single chair provided, noting that the room's exits were now blocked by armed guards. "I'm at your disposal, High Counselor." Vextar activated a holographic display showing detailed schematics of human military installations. But these weren't the same images from yesterday's session. These were classified blueprints that should have been impossible for aliens to obtain. "We've discovered that your species has been less than honest about your technological capabilities," Vextar said, his crystalline form pulsing with what Kane recognized as anticipation. "These weapons platforms are far more advanced than anything in your official submissions." Kane studied the displays with apparent surprise, though internally he was analyzing how the Council had obtained the information. The security breach suggested either a highly placed human traitor or alien infiltration capabilities far beyond what Earth's intelligence services had detected. "I'm not familiar with these specific installations," Kane said truthfully. "My role focuses on diplomatic relations, not military intelligence." Overseer Korath's red eyes glowed brighter. "Perhaps, but our sources indicate you might know more about humanity's darker capabilities than you've admitted. Tell us about something called the Winter Protocol." The Winter Protocol. Kane kept his expression neutral, but internally he was reassessing the situation completely. That project was known to fewer than a dozen people in the entire human government. If the aliens knew about it, they had either compromised humanity's highest levels of security or— "I'm not certain what you're referring to," Kane replied carefully. Supreme Military Advisor Krexath leaned forward, his scales shifting to a deeper red. "Come now, Ambassador. Our intelligence is quite thorough. We know about the sleeper assets, the hidden weapons caches, the contingency plans your species has scattered throughout this sector of space." Kane felt the familiar cold clarity settling over his mind, the same mental state that had once made him the most feared operative in human space. The Council wasn't just rejecting humanity's membership application. They were revealing that they'd been preparing for war. "Interesting intelligence capabilities," Kane observed. "I wonder how a peaceful alliance came to possess such detailed information about our internal security matters." Counselor Hyrith's feathers ruffled with obvious satisfaction. "The Galactic Council has survived for millennia by staying informed about potential threats. Your species represents a significant disruption to galactic stability." High Counselor Thaindros manipulated his controls again, and new displays appeared showing human colony worlds. "We've identified 17 separate human settlements that could serve as staging areas for military expansion, each one strategically positioned to threaten established trade routes or resource-rich systems." "Those are civilian colonies," Kane said, though he was beginning to understand the true scope of what was happening. "Are they?" Krexath's voice carried a predatory edge. "Our analysis suggests they're perfectly positioned as forward military bases. Combined with your species' aggressive tendencies and advanced weapons technology, they represent an unacceptable threat to Council authority." Kane sat back in his chair, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. "So this membership interview was never genuine. You've already decided humanity is a threat." Vextar's crystalline form flashed with what might have been amusement. "Very perceptive. The Council has indeed concluded that your species must be Contained before you become a larger problem. Contained how? Overseer Korath's breathing apparatus hissed with satisfaction. Your colonies will be placed under council oversight. Your military assets will be dismantled. Your expansion into space will be regulated through our oversight committees. Essentially, humanity will become a protectorate, supervised by species mature enough to guide your development responsibly. Kane nodded slowly, as if considering the proposal. And if humanity refuses to accept these terms? The silence that followed was answer enough. Kane could see it in their postures, their expressions, the way the guards had positioned themselves. The Galactic Council wasn't offering protectorate status as a choice. It was presenting an ultimatum. Submit to alien control or face the consequences. I see, Kane said quietly. How long have you been planning this? High Counselor Thaindros actually smiled, a disturbing expression on his ancient features. Since your species first achieved faster-than-light travel, we've been monitoring your expansion, studying your capabilities, preparing for this moment. The membership application was simply a convenient way to get a human representative here for formal notification of our decision. Kane looked around the room, taking in the satisfied expressions of beings who thought they held all the advantages. And you chose me specifically for this honor? Random selection among your diplomatic corps, Krexath replied, though we did prefer someone without obvious military connections. A civilian diplomat seemed more appropriate for delivering terms of surrender. Kane almost laughed at the irony. Of all the diplomats Earth could have sent, they'd chosen the one person who was absolutely the worst possible candidate for intimidation. But the Council had no way of knowing that Marcus Kane, mild-mannered ambassador, had once been something entirely different. I suppose I should thank you for your honesty, Kane said. It clarifies the situation considerably. Counselor Hyreth leaned forward eagerly. Then you understand the futility of resistance? Your species has no choice but to accept Council authority. Kane met her gaze directly, and for a moment something flickered in his eyes that made her unconsciously draw back. Oh, I understand perfectly. You've made your intentions very clear. Vextar activated another display, this one showing the positions of Council military fleets. To ensure there are no misunderstandings, you should know that enforcement squadrons are already positioned near your major colonies. Any attempt at military resistance will result in immediate orbital bombardment. Efficient, Kane acknowledged. You've thought of everything. We've had time to plan, Korath said smugly. Your species' predictable expansion patterns made positioning our forces quite simple. Kane stood up slowly, his movement causing several guards to shift nervously. Then I suppose there's nothing left to discuss. You've made your decision and I've received your message. High Counselor Thaindros nodded with satisfaction. Precisely. You'll be returned to Earth to deliver our terms to your government. They have 72 hours to begin compliance, or enforcement measures will commence. As Kane moved toward the door, Supreme Military Advisor Krexath called out, Ambassador, I hope your leaders are wise enough to accept reality. The Council has eliminated dozens of aggressive species over the millennia. We'd prefer not to add humanity to that list. Kane paused at the doorway and turned back, his expression thoughtful. You know, there's something I should probably mention about human diplomatic protocols. Yes? Thaindros asked. Kane's smile was cold and sharp as winter steel. When we send someone to negotiate with aliens who might pose a threat to our species, we don't usually send just a diplomat. The Council members exchanged uncertain glances as Kane continued toward his quarters, leaving them to wonder what exactly he meant by that statement. Kane returned to his quarters with the measured pace of a man deep in thought, though the guards escorting him couldn't see the cold calculation behind his calm exterior. Once alone, he activated his hidden scanner one final time, mapping every surveillance device, weapon system, and guard position throughout his section of the station. The Council had made several critical errors. They believed they were dealing with a helpless diplomat from a primitive species. They thought their overwhelming technological advantage made them invulnerable. Most importantly, they had no idea who Marcus Kane really was. Kane opened his briefcase and removed what appeared to be a standard diplomatic communication device. To any observer, including the sophisticated scanning systems monitoring his room, it looked exactly like the quantum entanglement communicators used by most spacefaring species for instantaneous long-range communication. But appearances could be deceiving, Kane. activated the device and spoke in a conversational tone that would sound normal to anyone listening. Status report to Earth Command. The Council has revealed their true intentions. Protectorate status with military oversight, backed by threat of orbital bombardment. Enforcement fleets already positioned near our colonies. He paused, appearing to listen to a response that never came. The device wasn't actually transmitting anything. Instead, it was receiving final confirmation of intelligence data that had been gathered over the past 3 days. Understood. Kane continued. Authorization confirmed. Execute Winter Protocol. Baba Yaga is going active. Kane set the device aside and began to change clothes. The simple diplomatic suit was replaced by a form-fitting black outfit that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. From hidden compartments in his briefcase, he retrieved items that definitely weren't standard diplomatic equipment. The molecular blade looked like a simple metal stylus, but could cut through virtually any known material. The neural disruptor appeared to be a standard medical scanner, but could render most organic beings unconscious instantly. The quantum destabilizer resembled a data pad, but was actually a weapon capable of destabilizing the molecular bonds in targeted structures. Kane had carried these tools across 3 star systems, through multiple security checkpoints, past sensors designed to detect any known form of weapon. The secret was that they weren't weapons until activated by someone who knew the proper combination of genetic markers, biometric signatures, and mental conditioning that defined a Winter Protocol asset. Marcus Kane, Diplomat, ceased to exist. What emerged from those quarters was something the galaxy had never seen before, though certain corners of human space knew it by reputation. The Baba Yaga was a myth that made hardened soldiers check their locks twice before sleeping. A ghost story told in whispers about the operative who could appear anywhere, eliminate any target, and vanish without leaving evidence of his presence. The surveillance systems in Kane's quarters registered nothing unusual. The sophisticated scanning equipment detected no weapons, no unauthorized transmissions, no changes in the room's occupant. As far as the Council's technology was concerned, Ambassador Kane was simply resting in his quarters after a difficult day of negotiations, but technology could be fooled by someone who understood its limitations. Kane moved through the station's ventilation systems with the fluid grace of someone who had done this countless times before. The Council's architects had designed Unity Prime to be impregnable from external attack, but they'd never considered the possibility of a threat emerging from within their own walls. His first stop was the Central Communication Hub, a heavily guarded facility that controlled all information flow to and from the station. The guards were veterans of multiple alien military forces, equipped with advanced weapons and armor, backed by automated defense systems that should have made infiltration impossible. Kane reached the communication center's core without triggering a single alarm. The quantum destabilizer made quick work of the primary transmission array, though the damage would appear to be a random equipment failure rather than sabotage. Kane uploaded a small piece of code into the backup systems, a virus that would lie dormant until activated by a signal only he could send. His second target was the station's power distribution network. Unity Prime drew energy from 3 massive fusion reactors, each one protected by multiple redundant safety systems and enough firepower to stop a small army. Kane wasn't interested in destroying the reactors. That would be crude and unnecessary. Instead, he introduced tiny molecular devices into the power regulation systems, microscopic machines that would respond to his command by creating cascading failures throughout the station's electrical grid. Not enough to cause permanent damage, but more than sufficient to create confusion when the moment came. The third objective was the most dangerous: Supreme Military Advisor Krexath's personal quarters. The reptilian commander was not only a senior council member, but also the architect of the military forces currently threatening humanity's colonies. Kane needed access to his personal files and communication records. Krexath's quarters were located in the most secure section of the station, protected by energy shields, armed guards, and sensor arrays that could detect the movement of individual dust particles. Getting inside required every skill Kane had developed during his years as humanity's most effective killer. The molecular blade made a microscopic incision in the outer hull, just large enough for Kane to insert a fiber optic probe. The neural disruptor, configured for remote operation, sent a precisely calibrated pulse through the probe that temporarily disrupted the sensory organs of the guards inside without causing permanent damage. Kane had 43 seconds before the guards recovered. He slipped through the hull breach and accessed Krexath's personal computer system, downloading terabytes of classified information about Council military capabilities, fleet positions, and strategic plans. But the most valuable intelligence was something he found completely by accident. Communication logs revealing that the Council's plans for humanity were just the beginning. They intended to contain 17 other developing species over the next century, essentially creating a galaxy-spanning empire controlled by the senior Council races. Humanity wasn't just facing conquest. They were witnessing the birth of a new galactic tyranny. Kane uploaded the data to his hidden transmitter and prepared to leave, but froze when he heard voices approaching from the corridor outside. Krexath was returning early from his evening meal, accompanied by several other Council members who wanted to discuss the human problem in private. Kane had two choices: attempt to escape and risk exposure, or remain hidden and gather additional intelligence about the Council's immediate plans. For a diplomat, the choice would have been obvious. For the Baba Yaga, it wasn't a choice at all. Kane activated his suit's optical camouflage and pressed himself against the ceiling as Krexath and his companions entered the room. The conversation that followed confirmed his worst suspicions about the Council's true nature and gave him the intelligence he needed to turn the coming confrontation in humanity's favor. By the time the Council members left Krexath's quarters, Kane had everything he needed to begin the final phase of his mission. The Winter Protocol hadn't been designed for diplomacy or negotiation. It was humanity's ultimate contingency plan for dealing with existential threats, and the Galactic Council had just proven they qualified. Kane returned to his quarters through the same ventilation routes, arriving just as his room's surveillance systems registered what appeared to be him, waking from a peaceful night's sleep. To any observer, Ambassador Kane had never left his bed. But across the station, microscopic devices were now in position. Viral programs were waiting for activation signals, and the most dangerous human alive was preparing to remind the galaxy why his species had never been conquered by anyone. The morning brought an unexpected development that would prove to be the Council's final mistake. Instead of the formal notification of their decision that Kane had expected, a priority alert echoed through the station's communication systems. Emergency signals flashed in corridors, and armed security teams rushed toward the docking bays. Kane's door chimed, and Overseer Korath's voice came through the speaker with barely contained excitement. "Ambassador Kane, you're required in the main chamber immediately. There's been a development regarding your species that requires your immediate attention." Kane dressed quickly in his diplomatic attire, concealing his weapons beneath the conservative suit. Whatever had happened, the Council's eagerness suggested it would work to his advantage. Desperate enemies made more mistakes than confident ones. The main chamber was filled with alien representatives, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of clicks, whistles, electronic tones, and translated speech. At the center of the room, a massive holographic display showed what appeared to be a human military vessel approaching Unity Prime at high speed. High Counselor Thaindros gestured toward the display as Kane entered. "Ambassador, it seems your government has made a regrettable decision. This warship appeared in our sensor range 20 minutes ago. Broadcasting demands for your immediate release." Kane studied the approaching vessel with apparent concern, though internally he was impressed by the timing. The ship was HMS Retribution, one of humanity's newest heavy cruisers. Her commander, Admiral Sarah Chen, was one of the few people who knew Marcus Kane's true identity. "I don't understand," Kane said, projecting confusion and worry. "Earth's government agreed to all your protocols for this meeting. Why would they send a military vessel?" Bextar's crystalline form pulsed with satisfaction. "Perhaps because they know what we've discovered about human military capabilities. Or maybe because they've realized their diplomatic mission has failed." Supreme Military Advisor Krexath activated additional displays showing the positions of Council fleet elements. "The vessel is significantly outgunned. We have 17 ships in this immediate area, including 3 dreadnoughts. If they're planning a rescue operation, they've made a serious tactical error." Kane watched the tactical displays with growing understanding. The Council was making the same mistake that had cost so many of his previous targets their lives. They were seeing what they expected to see, rather than what was actually happening. "Ambassador," Counselor Hyrith said, her feathers bristling with aggressive anticipation, "your government has 30 minutes to recall this vessel and accept our terms for protectorate status. If they refuse, we'll be forced to demonstrate why resistance is futile." Kane nodded slowly, playing his role perfectly. "I understand your position. Perhaps I could communicate with the vessel directly? There might be a misunderstanding that could be resolved through dialogue." Korath's red eyes glowed brighter. "Oh, there will be communication. We intend to broadcast our destruction of your warship to every human colony simultaneously. Your species needs to understand the consequences of defying Council authority." The chamber's main screen shifted to show Admiral Chen's face as the Retribution's communication system linked with Unity Prime. Kane had worked with Chen during the liberation of the Kepler colonies, and he could see the cold determination in her eyes that meant she understood exactly what was about to happen. "This is Admiral Chen of the HMS Retribution." Her voice echoed through the chamber. "I'm here to collect Ambassador Kane and return him safely to Earth. I request immediate clearance to dock and complete this transfer." High Counselor Thaindros stepped forward, his ancient features twisted with contempt. "Admiral, you are in Council space without authorization, commanding a vessel that poses a threat to galactic peace. You have two options: surrender immediately or be destroyed." Chen's expression didn't change. "I'm afraid neither of those options is acceptable. Ambassador Kane is under the protection of the Human Federation, and I'm here to ensure his safe return." Krexeth's scales shifted to a deeper red as he leaned toward the communication pickup. "Admiral, you're facing 17 Council warships with enough firepower to reduce your vessel to atomic dust. Surely you're not foolish enough to believe you can fight your way out of this situation." For the first time, Admiral Chen smiled, and Kane recognized the expression. It was the same cold amusement he'd worn himself when enemies underestimated what they were facing. "Counselor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not here to fight my way out of anything." Kane chose that moment to step into view of the communication pickup, his movement casual, but deliberately positioned to catch Chen's attention. The brief hand signal he made would have been invisible to alien observers, but Chen's nod confirmed she understood. "Admiral," Kane said in his diplomat's voice, "the Council has been very forthcoming about their concerns regarding human expansion. Perhaps we should consider their perspective." Chen's eyes flickered with understanding. "Of course, Ambassador. I'm sure the Council's wisdom is beyond question." The exchange seemed innocuous to the alien observers, but Kane and Chen had just confirmed that Winter Protocol was fully active. The HMS Retribution wasn't a rescue ship. It was bait. Krexeth activated his Fleet Command interface, bringing additional Council ships into attack formation around the lone human vessel. "Admiral, you have 10 minutes to lower your shields and prepare to be boarded. Any delay will be interpreted as a hostile act." "I understand your position," Chen replied, "but I'm afraid I have my orders. Ambassador Kane is to be returned to Earth intact, regardless of the political complications." Kane watched the tactical displays with professional interest. The Council was positioning their ships exactly as human intelligence had predicted they would, creating a perfect killing field around the Retribution. What they didn't realize was that Admiral Chen was following a battle plan that Kane himself had helped design years earlier. "Admiral," High Counselor Thaindros said, his voice heavy with finality, "you leave us no choice. All Council vessels, weapons free. Destroy the human ship." The chamber erupted in satisfied chatter as 17 alien warships opened fire simultaneously, their combined weapons turning the space around HMS Retribution into a blazing inferno of energy beams and explosive projectiles. The tactical display showed the human vessel's shields failing within seconds, her hull buckled and torn by overwhelming firepower. Within 90 seconds, HMS Retribution was nothing but expanding debris and cooling plasma. The Council members congratulated each other on their decisive action, already planning how to use recordings of the battle to intimidate other developing species. What they failed to notice was that Kane's expression hadn't changed throughout the entire engagement. "Well," Counselor Hyrith said with obvious satisfaction, "I believe that sends a clear message about the futility of opposing Council authority." Kane nodded thoughtfully. "It certainly does send a message. Something in his tone made several council members look at him more closely. Vextar's crystalline form flickered with uncertainty. "You seem remarkably calm for someone who just witnessed the destruction of your rescue ship." Kane smiled then, and for the first time since arriving at Unity Prime, he allowed his true nature to show through his diplomatic facade. "That's because Admiral Chen wasn't here to rescue me. She was here to confirm that the Galactic Council represents an existential threat to humanity." Silence fell over the chamber as the implications of his words sank in. Korath was the first to understand. "What are you saying, human?" Kane reached into his jacket and withdrew what appeared to be a simple communication device. To the Council's sensors, it registered as standard diplomatic equipment. In reality, it was the activation key for every piece of sabotage he'd placed throughout the station over the past 3 days. "I'm saying that the HMS Retribution was never intended to leave this system alive. Her real mission was to get me close enough to Unity Prime to complete my actual assignment." High Counselor Thaindros leaned forward, his ancient features twisted with growing alarm. "What assignment?" Kane's smile was cold as winter vacuum. "The elimination of the Galactic Council's command structure." He pressed a sequence of buttons on the device, and Unity Prime's lights began to flicker as his viral programs activated throughout the station's computer networks. Emergency alarms started blaring as power fluctuations cascaded through critical systems. "Impossible," Krexath snarled, his scales shifting to angry red. "Our security is absolute. No primitive could infiltrate our systems." Kane stood up slowly, his movement causing the chamber's guards to raise their weapons. "You keep using that word, primitive. I don't think it means what you think it means." The lights went out completely, plunging the chamber into darkness. When the emergency illumination activated 30 seconds later, Kane was gone. Supreme Military Advisor Krexath's voice echoed through the chamber as he activated his personal communicator. "All security teams to emergency stations. Find the human. Seal all sections. Full station lockdown now." But Kane was already 3 levels away, moving through maintenance tunnels that the Council's security teams didn't even know existed. The Baba Yaga was hunting, and the galaxy was about to learn why humanity had never been Unity Prime transformed into a maze of flashing emergency lights and echoing alarm signals, as Council security forces mobilized with military precision. Blast doors sealed off sections. Armed patrols swept through corridors, and sensor arrays swept for any trace of the missing human diplomat. The station's AI systems analyzed every cubic meter of space, searching for Marcus Kane. They found nothing. Kane moved through the station like a ghost made of shadows and silence. The maintenance tunnels and service conduits that he'd mapped during his reconnaissance gave him access to areas that didn't officially exist on Unity Prime's blueprints. Years of experience had taught him that every structure, no matter how well designed, had forgotten spaces and overlooked passages. His first target was already unconscious in a storage compartment 3 levels below the main chamber. Counselor Hirith had made the mistake of pursuing him alone, confident that her species' enhanced reflexes and natural weapons would be enough to handle a single human. The neural disruptor had rendered her unconscious before she could even activate her communicator. Kane left her alive but immobilized, bound with restraints made from her own equipment. Hirith would recover in a few hours with nothing worse than a headache and a profound new respect for human capabilities. The Baba Yaga didn't kill unnecessarily, but he wanted the Council to understand that their supposed superiority was an illusion. Moving through the station's infrastructure, Kane reached his second objective, the Central Command Center where Supreme Military Advisor Krexath was coordinating the search. The reptilian commander had positioned himself behind multiple layers of security, surrounded by the station's most elite guards and protected by energy shields that could stop a missile strike. Kane dropped through a ventilation grate directly above Krexath's command station. The elite guards were fast, well-trained, and equipped with weapons that could punch holes through battle armor. But they were also completely unprepared for an enemy who moved like liquid death and struck with surgical precision. The neural disruptor, configured for wide area effect, sent cascading waves of unconsciousness through the command center. Krexath himself lasted longer than his guards, his cybernetic enhancements providing partial resistance to the neural weapon. But Kane had dealt with enhanced opponents before. The molecular blade, activated and shaped into a narrow beam, severed the connections between Krexath's biological nervous system and his mechanical augmentations. The Supreme Military Advisor collapsed, paralyzed but conscious, as Kane began accessing the command center's systems. "You're making a mistake, human," Krexath managed to whisper through his damaged vocal systems. "Kill me, and the Council fleets will reduce every human world to radioactive ash." Kane didn't look up from the computer interface he was accessing. "I told you before, I'm not here to kill you. I'm here to eliminate the Council's command structure. There's a difference." With rapid keystrokes, Kane uploaded another virus into the station's communication systems, this one designed to broadcast on all Council frequencies simultaneously. But unlike his previous sabotage, this program wouldn't activate immediately. He wanted an audience for what came next. "The fleets won't attack human colonies," Kane continued conversationally as he worked, "because in approximately 6 minutes they're going to receive new orders." Krexath's eyes widened as he realized what Kane was doing. "You're accessing fleet command protocols. Impossible. Those systems are protected by quantum encryption." Kane glanced at him with mild amusement. "Your encryption is based on mathematical principles that assume certain limitations in processing power. Human quantum computers don't have those limitations." The truth was more complex than that. But Kane saw no reason to explain that the Winter Protocol had been in development for over a decade, specifically designed to penetrate and subvert alien command systems. Every piece of technology the Council had demonstrated during his diplomatic visit had been carefully analyzed by teams of human specialists. Kane's fingers moved across the control interface with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, he had administrative access to the Council's entire military network. Fleet positions, command codes, personnel files, strategic plans. Everything that made the Galactic Council's military machine function was now under his control. "You see," Kane said as he began implementing the final phase of his mission, "the Council made one critical error in their planning. You assumed that humanity was a typical developing species, stumbling blindly into a galaxy full of superior civilizations." On screens throughout the command center, data streams showed Kane's programs spreading through the Council's networks like digital wildfire. Ship after ship reported system anomalies as their computer cores were quietly compromised. "But humans don't stumble into anything unprepared," Kane continued. "We've been watching you for years, learning your weaknesses, preparing for this exact scenario. Every diplomatic contact, every trade negotiation, every cultural exchange was an intelligence-gathering operation." Krexath tried to speak, but his damaged systems could only produce electronic static. Kane paused in his work long enough to adjust the reptilian's life support systems, ensuring he would remain conscious for what came next. The Winter Protocol wasn't just about placing a single agent on Unity Prime, Kane explained. It was about positioning human assets throughout Council space, ready to act when the signal was given. Right now, every major Council installation is experiencing what they think are random system failures. Kane activated his communication device and spoke a single word. "Execute." Across the galaxy, dozens of human operatives who had been living as merchants, researchers, cultural attachés, and refugee civilians began implementing their own sabotage missions. Military installations went dark, communication networks experienced cascading failures, and orbital defense platforms began targeting each other instead of potential threats. Within 30 minutes, the Galactic Council's ability to coordinate military action had been completely severed. "The beauty of this approach," Kane said as he watched damage reports flooding in from across Council space, "is that we're not actually destroying anything permanently. We're just disrupting your ability to threaten peaceful species." Kane began uploading the final component of his mission, detailed intelligence about the Council's plans for galactic domination, including their intended targets and timeline for expansion. This information would be broadcast to every developed species in the galaxy, ensuring that the Council's victims would have advance warning of their plans. "You've started a war," Krexath managed to whisper. Kane shook his head. "No, I've prevented one. The Council was planning to conquer 17 different species over the next century. Now those species will have the information they need to prepare appropriate defenses." Kane stood up from the command console and looked down at the paralyzed alien. "Tell me, Supreme Military Advisor, what do you know about human fairy tales?" Krexath's confusion was visible even through his damaged features. "There's an old story about a witch called Baba Yaga," Kane continued. "She lived in a house that walked on chicken legs, and she had a very simple philosophy. Sometimes monsters need to be reminded that there are worse things in the dark." Kane activated his optical camouflage and began moving toward the exit. The Galactic Council forgot that lesson. "You saw humans as primitive prey and decided we'd make suitable victims for your expansion plans." As Kane reached the doorway, he turned back one final time, but some prey bite back. The last thing Krexath saw before losing consciousness was Kane's smile, cold and sharp as winter steel, before the human vanished into the shadows like a ghost made of nightmares. Conquered by anyone. 6 hours after Marcus Kane had vanished from Unity Prime's command center, High Counselor Thaindros sat in emergency session with the remaining council leadership, trying to comprehend the scope of the disaster that had befallen their civilization. The reports flooding in from across the galaxy painted a picture of coordinated devastation that should have been impossible for any single species to achieve. 57 major military installations had experienced simultaneous system failures. The Council's primary communication network was completely offline. 3 entire fleet groups had lost contact with Central Command after their ships began broadcasting contradictory orders. Most disturbing of all, detailed intelligence about the Council's expansion plans was now in the hands of every spacefaring species in the galaxy. "How?" Thaindros asked for the 100th time, his ancient voice cracking with exhaustion and disbelief. How did one human accomplish this? Vextar's crystalline form flickered weakly as he accessed damage reports. "Our analysis suggests a coordinated operation involving multiple agents positioned throughout our territory." The human diplomat was merely the trigger for a much larger plan. Overseer Korath, his mechanical systems running on backup power after his primary cybernetics had been damaged in Kane's escape, struggled to process the tactical implications. The precision required for this level of coordination, it suggests planning that began years ago, possibly decades. The chamber's main screen activated, showing grainy security footage from various locations throughout Unity Prime. The images were brief and unclear, showing glimpses of a figure moving through areas that shouldn't have been accessible, appearing and disappearing like a phantom. In every image, the figure's face was either obscured or turned away from the cameras. "The humans call him Baba Yaga," reported Intelligence Chief Mordak, a slug-like being whose species specialized in information analysis. "Our xenological files suggest this is a reference to an ancient folklore figure from their homeworld, a supernatural entity associated with death and judgment." Thaindros leaned forward in his seat. "Supernatural? You're suggesting the humans sent a mythological creature to attack us?" "Not mythological," Mordak corrected, his translated voice carrying a note of fear that was unusual for his species. "Our deep scan intelligence from human space has uncovered references to an individual designated as Winter Protocol Asset Alpha. No real name. No official records, but mentions dating back nearly 30 years in their military files." The screen changed to show decoded fragments of human communications, classified transmissions that the Council's intelligence services had intercepted over the years. The references were cryptic but consistent. Mentions of impossible missions completed, targets eliminated without detection, entire enemy networks neutralized by a single operative. "According to our analysis," Mordak continued, "this individual has been responsible for resolving at least 47 major threats to human space. Pirate fleets that vanished overnight, enemy agents found dead in locked rooms, terrorist cells that simply ceased to exist. In each case, human authorities attributed the results to conventional military action, but the evidence suggests a single operative working alone." Vextar's form pulsed with agitation. "One being cannot be responsible for that level of productivity." "Perhaps not," Mordak replied. "But the pattern is consistent across 3 decades of human expansion. Whenever humanity faces an existential threat, the Baba Yaga appears. The threat is eliminated with surgical precision and then he vanishes again." Korath's damaged voice systems crackled with static as he spoke. "Are you suggesting that the human government has been preparing for conflict with us for 30 years? "I'm suggesting," Mordak said carefully, "that humanity has been preparing for conflict with anyone who might threaten their species' survival. The Winter Protocol appears to be their ultimate contingency plan. The implications of this revelation settled over the council chamber like a cold fog. For millennia, they had viewed themselves as the galaxy's apex predators, superior beings destined to guide lesser species. The possibility that one of those lesser species had been quietly preparing to hunt them was almost incomprehensible. Thaindros activated his personal communication system, attempting to contact the scattered council fleets. Static and error messages were his only response. Status report on our military assets? 17% of our vessels are completely offline, Korath reported. Another 31% have partial system failures. Of the remaining ships, most are receiving conflicting orders and have defaulted to defensive positions. And the human fleet movements? Mordek consulted his intelligence reports. No significant changes detected. Their ships remain in standard patrol patterns around their colonies. No mobilization, no aggressive positioning. It's as if they're not preparing for war at all. The realization hit Thaindros like a physical blow, because they've already won. The chamber fell silent as the council leadership contemplated their new reality. The Galactic Council, supreme authority in this corner of the galaxy for over 3,000 years, had been effectively neutered by a species they'd considered primitive prey. What are our options? Vexter asked finally. Korath's laugh was a harsh electronic sound. Options? We can't coordinate our fleets, can't communicate with our colonies, can't even secure our own command center, and somewhere out there, the most dangerous human alive is still free. As if summoned by his words, the chamber's communication system activated, displaying an image that sent chills through every alien present. Marcus Kane sat in what appeared to be a comfortable chair aboard a human vessel, looking relaxed and completely unthreatened. Behind him, the distinctive stars visible through the viewport indicated he was already light years away from Unity Prime. High Counselor Thaindros, Kane said politely, his diplomatic demeanor completely restored. I hope you've had time to review the situation and understand the new parameters of our relationship. Thaindros found his voice with difficulty. What do you want, human? Kane's smile was pleasant and completely terrifying. Nothing you weren't already prepared to offer. Peace, mutual respect, and the recognition that some species prefer to handle their own affairs without outside interference. You've crippled our entire civilization. I've provided you with a learning experience, Kane corrected gently. Your systems will recover within a few days, though I recommend upgrading your cybersecurity before then. The next species you threaten might not be as restrained as humanity. Vexitar leaned forward desperately. You can't expect us to simply accept this humiliation. The Council has authority over... The Council, Kane interrupted, has authority over nothing. You've demonstrated that your idea of galactic leadership involves threatening peaceful species with orbital bombardment. That approach has been discontinued. Kane stood up from his chair, and something in his movement made every alien in the chamber instinctively recoil. I'm returning to Earth now to deliver your message about protectorate status. I think my government will find it amusing. Wait, Thaindros called out. What happens now? What are your species' intentions? Kane paused at the edge of the transmission pickup, his expression thoughtful. Humanity will continue expanding into space, exploring new worlds, meeting new species. We'll offer trade, cooperation, and friendship to those who reciprocate, and for those who prefer more aggressive approaches to diplomacy. Kane's smile returned, cold and sharp. Well, they might want to research human folklore before making any hasty decisions, particularly the stories about things that hunt monsters in the dark. The transmission ended, leaving the Council leadership alone with their shattered authority and the growing realization that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Word would spread quickly among the spacefaring species. The Galactic Council had been humbled by a single human operative, and humanity was not the primitive prey they appeared to be. In the days that followed, as the Council struggled to restore their communications and re-establish control over their scattered fleets, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. Species that had been targeted for containment were suddenly receiving detailed intelligence about the Council's plans. Several civilizations were already forming defensive alliances, preparing to resist any future expansion attempts, and in the shadows between the stars, other human operatives continued their quiet work, watching and waiting for any sign that the lesson needed to be reinforced. The Winter Protocol remained active, its assets positioned throughout the galaxy like immune cells in a vast organism, ready to respond to any threat to humanity's survival. The galaxy had learned a new truth. Humans might appear peaceful and diplomatic, but they were apex predators wearing the mask of civilization. And somewhere in the darkness between worlds, the Baba Yaga waited, ready to remind anyone who forgot that some prey were far more dangerous than their hunters realized. The legend had been born, and it would outlive empires,